Joining us now is Chris Murphy, the Democratic senator from Connecticut, who has made combating gun violence his mission in Congress. Senator Murphy, thank you for joining us. I want to go back. You were on this program just 2 days after the Sandy Hook massacre. It was just a couple of weeks before you were first sworn in as a U.S. senator. And you were asked at that point, this was 10 years ago, you were asked if Sandy Hook and that horrific tragedy we saw in Newtown was going to represent a turning point, a tipping point, if something was finally going to be done about gun violence. This was your response.
The time for sort of saying that we can't talk about the policy implications of tragedies like this is over. And for us here in Connecticut, well, we're going to grieve and make sure the families have everything they need. We're going to be on the floor of the Senate very soon talking about where we go from here.
10 years later, what has been accomplished?
It's inconceivable to me that we have not passed significant federal legislation trying to address the tragedy of gun violence in this nation, especially because since Sandy Hook, we've seen even worse slaughter in Las Vegas, in Orlando. As has been mentioned, the pace of everyday gun violence has dramatically escalated over the past 2 years. Now, states have passed tighter laws. There have been referendums passed. There are plenty of local efforts that have been successful in tightening up our gun laws, but we need federal legislation, and my hope is that this time is different. I get it. Every single time after one of these mass shootings, there's talks in Washington and they never succeed. But there are more Republicans interested in talking about finding a path forward this time than I have ever seen since Sandy Hook. And well, in the end, I may end up being heartbroken. I am at the table in a more significant way right now with Republicans and Democrats than ever before. Certainly many more Republicans willing to talk right now than were willing to talk after Sandy Hook.
And Senator McConnell, the Republican leader, has tasked John Cornyn, one of his top lieutenants, to take part in those negotiations. Can you bring us inside the room or inside? I guess you guys are having Zoom conversations now that the Senate's in recess. What is going on? What are you hearing from Cornyn and from the other Republicans?
We have continued to work throughout the weekend. I was in touch with Senator Cornyn, Senator Toomey, other Republicans and Democrats yesterday. These are serious negotiations, and we are going to continue to meet through early next week to try to find some common ground. Now, listen, I've been clear. I'm not going to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Of course, I would love to ban assault weapons. I think that's the probably most impactful way to stop these mass shootings. I would love universal background checks. That's the best way to try to curb the level of violence that happens in my city of Hartford and other cities like it across the country. But what we're talking about is not insignificant. Inside this room, we're talking about red flag laws. We're talking about strengthening and expanding the background check system, if not universal background checks. We're talking about safe storage. And yes, we're also talking about mental health resources and more security dollars for schools, a package that really, in the end, could have a significant downward pressure on gun violence in this country and break the logjam. Maybe that's the most important thing we could do, is just show that progress is possible and that the sky doesn't fall for Republicans if they support some of these common sense measures. We've got a short time frame, Jonathan. We've got to get this ready for Congress when Congress reconvenes in about a week, but I think we can do it.
But let me ask you, in this case, I mean, the issues that we hear the most about are, expanding background checks, red flag laws. Well, this person who bought this shooter here did not have a criminal record. It's hard to see a background check would have stopped him. In terms of red flag laws, he had no diagnosed mental illness. School security, this school system had just doubled its security budget. Let me ask you about one thing that I don't hear a lot about, raising the age. I know you're in favor of this, but is it part of the discussion? Right now, you can buy an AR-15 at 18. You can't buy a handgun until you're 21. Is this now part of the discussion?
Right now, we're having, I think, a discussion inside this room about the profile of the current mass shooter, which, as you mentioned, does tend to be young men in between the ages of 18 and 21. That is a profile that does not allow you to buy a handgun, but does allow you to buy an assault rifle. And so there are discussions happening in these rooms about how we recognize this profile and maybe make it a little bit harder for those individuals to quickly get their hands on weapons. I don't yet know exactly what's possible, whether the votes are there to raise the age, but we're having a discussion about what we do about that specific profile, and it's an encouraging conversation.
So you mentioned that some states have acted. One of those states is Florida. After Parkland, Florida passed a law, passed a bill, signed into law by the governor in 2018. Let's look at what it did. It raised the minimum age, as we just discussed, for long guns from 18 to 21. It imposed a 3-day waiting period. It banned bump stocks. It improved background checks. Now, that law, passed after Parkland, was passed by a Republican legislator in a very Republican state and signed into law by a Republican governor named Rick Scott, who is now, of course, one of your colleagues in the Senate. Couldn't that be a model? I mean, if Rick Scott could sign that into law in Florida and support that in Florida, why couldn't that pass in the United States Senate?
The Florida law is a good law, and it's a signal of what's possible, right? It married together changes to Florida's gun laws with some significant investments in mental health and school security. And I had a long conversation with Senator Scott last week and had him tell me the story of how they were able to pass that legislation and get Republicans to support it. It also proved that Republicans could take on the gun lobby because the NRA opposed that measure and still get reelected, which has been the case I've been making to Republicans for a decade. So that kind of legislation certainly is a model. Significant, not everything that anti-gun violence advocates would want. And while I don't think we will mirror the Florida law, it certainly is the kind of thing that would make a big difference and would make a lot of families and kids in this country feel more secure and more safe if it passed at a national level.
And very quickly, we're almost out of time. I mean, you have led the discussion on the gun issue, which is obviously a critical one here. What are the other things that you think need to be done, aside from, having gun safety measures, limits on gun purchases, red flag, all that we've just discussed? What are the other issues that need to be addressed to deal with this problem?
Well, I mean, remember, this is a problem that happens every day in our cities, and so we have got to invest in our cities. When you talk to the victims of urban gun violence, they want gun laws changed, but they actually want services for their kids so that there's not a sense of hopelessness that drives many kids into very at-risk and dangerous behaviors. So the president's domestic agenda includes significant money, $5 billion, for urban anti-gun violence initiatives, violence interruption programs. And I think we've got to remember that gun laws is a big part of the solution, but we also have to have, in these poorer neighborhoods, services wrapped around kids and families that need them.
All right, Senator Murphy, it sounds like at least there are some encouraging signs that this time could be different based on your discussion with Republicans. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.